Hi, my name is Jared and this is Horror Obsession. Today I want to talk about Scream 3, directed by the peerless Wes Craven. I already talked about Scream 1 and 2, and check out those videos if you haven't already. And the time has come to continue my discussion of the Scream franchise with Scream 3, widely considered to be the weakest entry. The audience and critic scores are well below average, and both on release and over time, Scream 3 has not held up well to critical or audience evaluation. You would be hard-pressed to find anyone who ranks this movie anywhere but the bottom, but is it really that bad?
Yes, 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 yes.
I have so many reasons for not liking this movie, and a couple I do actually enjoy, but let's start at the beginning with the opening kill. Every Scream movie starts with an opening death scene, a classic slasher trope that the Scream franchise tries to keep fresh and engaging each movie. I think it is safe to say the opening to Scream 3 is the worst opening of all, but let's go through the originals just to make sure. Scream 1 has the iconic Drew Barrymore kill and is one of the best openings of any horror movie ever, not just the Scream franchise. No explanation needed, and if you disagree,
That's fine. I get that, but you're wrong and I hate you.
I rather enjoy the movie theater setting for the opening of Scream 2, which also serves to introduce the stab movies within the Scream universe. An interesting critique of the celebration of violence, which also makes fun of people who say horror characters are stupid. By showing Jada hugging the killer while telling the girl on screen to run because she's so dumb for not knowing she's in a horror movie. Scream 4 has a very controversial opening scene because they keep doing the Inception opening within an opening thing, and I get why some people hate it, but I kinda love it. The opening sort of collapses in on itself under the weight of the meta-commentary, but I still find it fun and very unique compared to the other openings. The opening of Scream 3 doesn't have anything near as interesting to say as the opening of Scream 2 or Scream 4, and I'm going to avoid discussing 5 or 6 for now, but suffice it to say those openings are more well regarded than Scream 3. This opening basically serves 3 functions. To show that Cotton Weary made it big off the fame from the interview he desperately wanted in Scream 2, to introduce the voice modulating thingy, and to kill off Cotton and wrap up his story. Only problem is, neither Cotton nor his girlfriend are all that interesting of characters, though I will say I appreciate that they continue to use the opening death of the movie as the inciting incident for the story. The inciting incident is the event that kicks off the forward momentum of the story, and in the first movie, Casey's death alerts the town that something spooky's going on, and that it relates to Sydney's mother since it was on the anniversary of her murder. In Scream 2, the death alerts Sydney that Ghostface is not gone, and also lays the foundation for Gale to figure out the killer is killing people in the same order as the first movie. In Scream 3, Cotton's death kicks off the investigation into the killings and also gives us this iconically stupid line.
He was making a movie called Stab. He was stabbed.
Before I get into the rest of the flaws, I wanted to say that Courtney Cox and David Arquette are the heart and soul of this franchise. Sydney is clearly the final girl, and often the final girl is the heart and soul, but not in Scream. Wes and Kevin Williamson wanted to show her being affected by the trauma of her friends getting killed, and she is written to be icy and cold in both the second and third movies, and the fourth movie. Oh, and also the fifth movie. Not the sixth movie, though that's because she wasn't in it. She reprises the role of Sydney in Scream 7, though. And that movie isn't out yet, but is she going to come off as icy and cold and traumatized by the death of her friends?
Yes, 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 yes.
She doesn't relate very well to anyone and feels isolated and alone, and the result is we don't have much of an emotional core related to Sydney. Since Courtney Cox and David Arquette were married in real life and met during the filming of Scream 1, it was a great choice to position them as the emotional core of the entire franchise, and they end up being the best and possibly only good thing about Scream 3. They have some cute moments, including the half-hearted love triangle they try and set up between Parker Posey, David, and Courtney, although this kind of gets dropped at the start of Act 2. Once Courtney and Parker start investigating Maureen Prescott's history, the love triangle stuff doesn't really get mentioned again. But I actually really like the dynamic between real Gale and fake Gale. I actually think the most interesting and clever part of the entire script is the idea of showing actors and actresses playing the characters we know from the franchise. Parker is playing Gale, this guy is playing Dewey, and this lady is playing Sydney. There is a funny dynamic of the actress playing a character, but that character is also an actress, and the character is playing one of the characters from the franchise.
He was making a movie called Stab. He was stabbed.
In theory, this kind of meta-commentary should be what defines the Scream franchise, and at times Scream 3 gets close to being interesting, but the movie never really has anything clever to say about the dynamic. That being said, there are a few pretty funny lines.
I'm sorry that things didn't work out with Brad Pitt, but being single, that's a pretty good fallback.
Gives me more time for my work. After all, Gail Weathers, you're such a complex character.
But overall, this feels like a wasted opportunity. Speaking of the humor, Scream 3 tries to shift between serious concluding chapter of a super serious horror trilogy to sarcastic, joking comedy, even falling so far as using slapstick comedy. I think this is the biggest flaw of the film and ultimately what sunk the movie with critics and with audiences. There is nothing worse than having a joke fall flat on screen, and this happens again and again in Scream 3. The perfect example is a scene towards the end of the movie when Sydney is in the private screening room with Roman and Gail and Dewey are searching around. Roman is giving a speech about how Maureen was taken advantage of and how it ruined her life, in a deeply upsetting and emotional moment for Sydney. Roman is basically saying, all of your pain and grief from the previous movies is really because of me. I am responsible for your mother dying and for all your friends dying, and ultimately I am the cause of your trauma. This is some heavy stuff, and at the exact same time, we get this scene of Gail and Dewey awkwardly falling into a room. Literal slapstick physical comedy, interrupting this emotional moment and totally undermining the tone. To be clear, this is not the only time this happens in the movie, and I feel Scream 3 was a victim of his expectations. Wes and Kevin knew that there was humor in the previous movies, and balancing the tone of serious and comedy was a big part of what made those movies work so well, and this movie not work so well.
Well, in that case, I'm gonna go dust for fingerprints with Jane Pauley.
It can be hard to articulate why that is, and I think it mostly has to do with the overall seriousness of the story. Scream 2 never took the premise too seriously, and I think that works to the movie's credit. Scream 3 knows it is wrapping up the trilogy, and Wes and Kevin decided to go with a more serious tone for much of the conclusion, attempting to recontextualize the entire story as really being about Roman instead of Billy. I never like when movies do this. I mean, the first movie is the masterpiece. Why are we trying to say, oh, Billy was actually just an idiot pawn being manipulated by this other villain? I basically just ignored this when watching the first movie, since it is so much better without this added context. Roman is alright as a ghost face, but he's no Billy or Stu. The Hollywood setting is sort of an intriguing choice that once again I feel gets a bit wasted. The first movie takes place in Woodsboro and at Sydney's high school, and the natural progression is to follow Sydney to college. After college comes the soul-crushing, repetitive, looping nightmare of salaried work, and sure enough, that is what Sydney is doing at the start of the movie. Sydney has decided to work from home, a radical concept at the time, out in the country away from everything so she can feel safe. We will get to her character in a moment, but I actually think focusing on this setting and having her living the small town life away from everything would have been a great setting to have a more home invasion focused movie, instead of bringing all the glitz and glam of Hollywood, which would have had the added benefit of actually being scary. One of the flaws of this movie is it seems to have lost sight of the fact this is supposed to be a horror franchise. There is almost nothing that is even a little bit scary in Scream 3, and the movie really suffers from it. Between the jokes falling flat and there being no good scares, there isn't much meat left on the bone. All that's left is the character work, and Cotton gets killed right away, which leaves Gail, Dewey, and Sydney. I talked about how Gail and Dewey carry the movie earlier, but how about Sydney? Concluding her story is fundamentally the entire point of this movie. Sydney starts the movie understandably scared, hiding away from the world but still trying to do good. This is perfectly in line with her character. She would try and still help people who have been through trauma rather than slinking away to a dark corner of the world forever. She doesn't really have much in the way of friends or social interaction, presumably because she is worried about someone infiltrating her life the way Mickey did, but also to keep those friends safe. Everyone close to Sydney seems to die, a fact we are reminded of by Sydney wearing the Greek letters Derek gave her in the last film. Sydney's progression in this movie is to accept her past, confront her trauma, and reach a catharsis about her life. The one way the movie cleverly uses the Hollywood setting is by having Sydney's childhood home recreated as a set, and for her to have to evade Ghostface while running through aforementioned set. This is a physical manifestation of her traumatic past, and she also knows the layout of the house, but the fact the house is not real almost haunts her to her death, since one of the doors doesn't go anywhere. But Sydney quickly turns it to her advantage and uses it to throw Ghostface down a story. Sydney continuing to be a creative and formidable final girl is one of the only things Scream 3 does well. I will give Scream 3 credit, however, because they also do a good job of wrapping up her character arc. Sydney starts the movie scared, like I mentioned, living alone and away from everything. By the end of the movie, she is with Dewey and Gale and Kincaid, so she is no longer living alone and afraid. The door is accidentally left open, and she at first goes to close it, but then realizes the story is over and Ghostface is gone, so she leaves it open, perfectly symbolizing her growth out of trauma. This was an amazing way to end the story, if you ignore the fact that the actual movie that came before the ending was kinda awful. The Scream franchise is about satirizing different entries in a horror franchise. Obviously, the first movie is just about slasher movies in general, and then Scream 2 is about horror sequels, and Scream 3 is clearly about the concluding chapter of a trilogy. Randy's discussion of the rules in each film does a good job of playfully examining the rules of each kind of movie, based primarily on the tropes of the genre. In order for a trope to develop, there needs to be enough movies in the genre for similarities to emerge and become redundant. There are a million slasher movies, so this works well for Scream, and there are a million horror sequels, so it works beautifully for Scream 2. However, off the top of your head, how many concluding chapters of a trilogy can you name?
Is this simply another sequel? Well, if it is, same rules apply. But if you find yourself dealing with an unexpected backstory and a preponderance of exposition, you are dealing with the concluding chapter of a trilogy. Because true trilogies are all about going back to the beginning and discovering something that wasn't true from the get-go.
In Friday the 13th, the third movie has none of the same characters besides Jason. In Hellraiser 3, it's just a jumbled disaster. Halloween 3 is the one with the weird masks that has none of the same characters, not even Michael. But what about the other major horror franchise Wes Craven pioneered? Nightmare on Elm Street 3 brings back Nancy, sure, but none of the characters are the same, and I'm not sure this movie fits his rules either. Randy says trilogies are about going back to the beginning and discovering something new we didn't know, and there isn't anything about Nancy that we discover in Nightmare 3. There is a Halloween trilogy, but that wasn't out when Scream 3 was made. I guess the Evil Dead movies are a trilogy if you count Army of Darkness, but I don't think that movie fits the rules they lay out either. One of the primary things the Scream franchise has always sought to do is to educate the audience about the rules of the genre, since Wes and Kevin have seen like every horror movie ever, and they can condense the tropes into an easy-to-digest monologue from Randy. But Scream 3 fails at this. They pretty much just make up the rules to fit the specific script they have already written, describing the rules of Scream 3, not of horror trilogies in general. The rules don't inform or educate the audience on anything particularly insightful. It does foreshadow the rest of Scream 3, but I would hardly call that clever, especially considering they are doing it under the guise of analyzing some kind of unclear and murky horror trilogies. The rules laid out in Scream 1 are taken as gospel in the slasher community because Wes and Kevin were absolutely spot on, but I can't think of a single rule in Scream 3 that educated me on the genre. This is a major disappointment considering how iconic Randy laying out the rules is in the other movies. Overall, Scream 3 is pretty bad. As far as what makes a Scream movie different from most slashers, there is the meta-horror commentary stuff, and Scream 3 sucks at this. The Hollywood setting isn't well utilized, the rules don't connect meaningfully to any specific horror movies and are kinda just there because they know they have to be. The opening kill is the worst in the franchise. Sydney does go through a compelling and interesting character arc, and the end scene is executed wonderfully, but Scream 3 just doesn't do it for me. It tries to be funny and fails, which is one of the worst things a movie can do, and it is not scary, which is one of the worst things a horror movie can do. This leaves a withered husk of a movie, superficially engaging but ultimately empty, embodying the very shallowness they sought to satirize. Would I say I was terribly disappointed in this movie?
Yes, 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 yes.
And that's coming from someone with a screaming horror obsession.